kind introduction, and it's my honor to be here, and greetings to you all. I think you look at the title of my talk, and you look at me, and you think, what can this lawyer from New York know about K-pop? And what can he tell an audience in Seoul about K-pop? And how can he think that he's going to make a connection between K-pop and the world of international arbitration? And you may also be figuring, at least, it might be entertaining to see him try and fail to make that connection. Now, my perspective is similar. So let's see how it goes. There are, in fact, a lot of people in New York who know about Bangtan So-Hyun-dan, or BTS, as we more easily call them in the West. They recently did a US tour, and they sold out every concert. Their penetration of social media has been staggering. And with this comes influence. BTS may have started out as a boy band on a path fabricated for them by their managers. But their success has been so spectacular that they now are the ones who influence others, also outside South Korea. And BTS, of course, isn't the only mega K-pop group. There's also Big Bang. And Big Bang, we know, is much more than a fad that matters only to teenagers. Big Bang has been on Time's most influential list. Again, the matter of influence. And I don't foresee that this influence will be reversed by the current minor drug scandal attached to T.O.P. Now, K-pop's international story began, of course, with the godfather of K-pop, Psy. There was no rational reason to expect that Psy would become a global star. He was overweight. He wasn't from London or New York or LA or Nashville. He became famous for basically just one thing, one dance move. Then suddenly people around the world are trying to pronounce the name of the district in Seoul, Gangnam. And all of this has created a geographical shift in the pop world. It's not that the center has moved to Seoul, but that Korea has become part of the center of the international pop world. K-pop got to the center by going through what I suggest is 3 developmental phases. K-pop phase 1, going back 20 years or so, it was an exclusively local scene. K-pop participants, of course, knew that they were at the periphery of an international pop world, but they didn't have a realistic means to try to be part of the center, and they probably didn't feel much motivation to try. Now, phase 1 ended with the success in South Korea of UCC channels and YouTube in and around 2010. With these channels, pop fans and pop stars in Korea could immerse themselves in pop cultural exports from the West, with influence flowing from the West to Korea. That's K-pop phase 2. We're now in K-pop phase 3. where there's an undeniable two-way flow of influence. Now, with that very, very brief history of K-pop, I'm going to move to the world of international arbitration. And I'm going to consider in a moment to what extent a useful analogy can be drawn between Korea's experience of K-pop and Korea's experience of soft law. But first I need to define soft law in international arbitration. In the international arbitration world, soft law refers to practices that aren't part of any national law and aren't in any way imposed on arbitrating parties. Instead, these are practices that are adopted voluntarily by arbitrators and practitioners. And the primary soft laws in the arbitration world are the rules and guidelines recently issued by the IBA's arbitration committee. This means the IBA rules on the taking of evidence in international arbitration and the IBA guidelines on conflicts with their famous orange lists and red lists. These rules and guidelines have over time become so broadly accepted that it is fair now to characterize them as soft law. Now, the international arbitration community has been described by academics as an epistemic community. It's a fancy word, an academic word. It means a community of shared interests and expertise. The essence of this quotation, which I won't read aloud, is that there's a shared culture in any epistemic community, such as the international arbitration community. And soft law is a prime example of the shared culture in our epistemic community. There are, though, some who are involved in international arbitration who feel that they're not really part of this community, that the interest and expertise spoken of in this quotation may characterize an elite concentrated in London, Paris, New York, and Geneva, and imposed on the rest of the international arbitration. And it is said, a principal instrument by which this elite imposes its power through a form of soft imperialism is through the dissemination of soft law. And you can see that critique expressed in this quotation. Now, this critique of soft law raises two questions. One I will get to in a moment is whether it's fair to say that soft law stratifies rather than unifies the international arbitration world. But before I get to that question, I want to consider first the question to what extent a sub-community's evaluation of soft law depends upon where that sub-community feels it stands on the axis between the center and periphery of the international arbitration world. And the sub-community I want to take as my example is the Korean arbitration community. So having spoken to an audience in Seoul about Kpop, I am now going to compound my risk by talking to the Korean arbitration community about the Korean arbitration community. 20 to 30 years ago, where I asked where South Korea stood in relation to the rest of the world of international arbitration, for sure I would have said the periphery. Not much then was happening here. There it was an exclusively, or almost exclusively, local scene. We can call that KR Phase 1. 10 to 15 years ago, I might still have said the periphery, but I would have qualified that by stressing the sophistication and skill of Korean lawyers who had already made their presence in the international arbitration world very visible. And one reason for that development was that after the 1998 financial crisis, many Western companies came into Korea to purchase Korean assets, and the purchase contracts often contained international arbitration clauses, and those contracts led to international arbitrations, and this exposed the Korean arbitration community to international arbitration disputes. And this all led to what I call KR Phase 2. Today, for me, South Korea incontestably comprises part of the center of the international arbitration world. The most obvious reason for this is the ever-growing importance of Korean companies in the world of international trade and investment. Another reason is that Korean companies have shown themselves to be litigious. Certainly more litigious than, for example, Japanese companies. Another reason is that Korean lawyers themselves have established a major international presence. This is attributable to several factors, the most important of which is that you have served the Korean companies who themselves have become parties to international arbitration. Another factor is cultural. Korean moms and dads and Korean law firms have been sending so many of your brightest students and associates to legal education in the West, especially in the US. And so we're now, I submit, in KR Phase 3. Now the parallel to Kpop is, I hope, established. And even if it's not established, I'm not going to try any harder to establish it. Has KR quite reached the international penetration and influence of Kpop? I don't think so. Are there G-Dragons, legal G-Dragons in this room who will change that? Maybe. The success of your international arbitration community has, I expect, influenced how soft law has been received in Korea. I could speak only anecdotally, but to my understanding, IBA soft law products are widely used in arbitration involving Korean counsel and Korean parties, and without any resistance to these rules and guidelines as having been imposed by outsiders. I attribute this, in large part, to the fact that we're in KR Phase 3, that your community has a sense of itself as part of the center of the international arbitration world. There's also an important factor of a different nature entirely. And I believe it arises from the nature of your own civil procedure. Soft law, for the most part, reflects a blend of common law and civil law practices. And this works for Korea. Because though your legal tradition is obviously rooted in the civil law tradition, you are significantly influenced by the common law tradition. Above all, your civil procedure involves cross-examination, and this distinguishes you from the several purely civil law systems that have expressed resentment of IBA soft law as soft imperialism imposed by the Anglo-Saxons on the civil law world. Notwithstanding that IBA soft law products have been initiated and developed equally by civil law practitioners and by common law practitioners. I'm now going to consider the other aspect of the critique of soft law that you see in this quotation. And this is whether soft law is fairly seen as in effect a kind of soft imperialism, not necessarily as between the common law world and the civil law world, but as between what can be called the center and the periphery. My submission to you is that soft law does the opposite of what this critique suggests. My submission is that soft law softens, not hardens, the boundaries between the center and the periphery, that its effect is leveling, not hierarchical. Now, some of those who criticize soft law say that soft law over-legislates, and by so doing, deprives arbitration of the flexibility that is one of the advantages of arbitration over national court litigation. This has been said in an entertaining way by a prominent Geneva practitioner named Michael Schneider. And as he has written, if the process of guideline production continues, all aspects of arbitration will be fully covered by guidelines, which are accepted as best practices and state-of-the-art. When this happy moment is reached, the international arbitration community need not think anymore. This is sarcasm, in case it's not clear. Now, it's for sure that soft law has little to offer to the group of practitioners as talented and experienced as Michael Schneider. They don't need the guidance of soft law, either to craft a procedure that works for a particular case, or to figure out how to render a fair procedural decision. But even in cases over which these talented and experienced lawyers preside, there are other participants, there are other players. They could be counsel, they could be the parties, and they may be less experienced in international arbitration. And one very rarely hears criticism of soft law from those who are least experienced. And I see at least three reasons for this. One is that there is no clash of cultures, in fact, between the center and periphery of the international arbitration world. International arbitration is now practiced by participants from all over the world, and it is essentially the same game everywhere. The numbers of young lawyers who participate annually in the VIS group court competition and the geographic dispersion of these lawyers attest to the fact that everyone is trying to master the same game. Now, this first factor can be seen as a negative reason for the paucity of attacks on soft law from the periphery. This is, there seems to be no competing culture of international arbitration other than that reflected by mainstream soft law. But there are also, I believe, positive reasons why critics of soft law are rarely those with the least experience of the process. And the principal one is that those with less experience evidently recognize that soft law mitigates the advantage of the experience. And it does this by making known in advance the standard practices that might otherwise be known only to insiders. And by doing this, soft law both evens the playing field and eases barriers to entry. Now, another positive reason for the worldwide acceptance of soft law is that we are more likely to see a process as fair when we both know what to expect and then see our expectations fulfilled. And soft law tells us more about what we should expect. And we see this point expressed by Professor Rusty Park. His name is Park, but he's not Korean. He's Bostonian. And he says here, potential benefit of procedural soft law is that it can enhance the type of fairness business managers expect in dispute resolution. Skipping to the second paragraph, no rule of law will often detract from the party's sense of fairness, which is often fostered more by fidelity to pre-established standards than by the content of the standards themselves. last positive reason for the embrace of mainstream soft law at the periphery is that soft law plays an important role in advancing another essential virtue of international arbitration in comparison to national court litigation, and it is what I've called elsewhere the relative familiarity of international arbitration as compared to national court litigation. If you take, for example, a contract between a Korean and a Brazilian company, and you assume that they are negotiating a dispute resolution clause, and you assume that they have agreed to London as the place for dispute resolution, they still have a choice between the courts of London and international arbitration in London. Now we know from surveys that these Korean and Brazilian parties will almost always choose international arbitration in London over the courts of London. But why? It's not because of concern of fairness. They can get fairness from the London courts. It's not because of neutrality. They'll know that the London courts are neutral. It's not because of the process. They'll know they can get due process before the London courts. Instead, I submit it's because London courts simply seem too foreign, or at least more foreign and less familiar than international arbitration with its blend of common law and civil law practices. And soft law has an important role to play here. By universalizing the process in a way that makes the process in advance less foreign than any court system other than your own, soft law enhances arbitration's relative familiarity as compared to national court litigation. Now, this is a virtue that matters to parties everywhere, both at the center and the periphery, but I think it plays even more importantly on the periphery, where there would otherwise be a greater risk that a legal advisor might consider the international arbitral process to be just as foreign court litigation. So to conclude to you, I might be expected to go an hour, but I'm not going to go an hour. My submission is that soft law has an effect of leveling rather than one of entrenchment of an elite. Our community is marked more and more by participation from all corners of the world, by practitioners who are decision makers and wielders of power. And soft law contributes to this dual movement of influence from the center to the periphery, and of the periphery to the center. Now, unlike the situation in some civil law countries, I believe that there has been little tension in the Korean legal community as to the effect of soft law here. For you, soft law isn't soft imperialism. This is in part because of the common law elements in your practice, but it's also because South Korea has become part of the center of the international arbitration world. And the same, we know, has become true for Kpop in the international pop world. Now, BTS summarized my argument in their own way, and in a way that may require some effort of imagination to apply it to international arbitration, but I think you can do so. Now, I can promise you I'm not going to read this aloud. And instead, while you read this, I will thank you for your attention.